What paranormal activities have you witnessed?
One weekend, I was at my dad's house. He'd come to the upstairs bathroom to get a shave and heard footsteps in my stepsister's room. I thought it was him walking around initially, so I got up to find him standing at her closed door. He looks back at me and whispers.
You can hear that too, right?
I nodded and he opened the door slowly. My stepsister was asleep and never had been awake apparently. There was no way she could have crossed the room, gotten in bed, and pretended to be THAT convincingly asleep in the 2 seconds it took my dad to open the door. He went in, checked her TV, which had never been on. She had one of those big ones from the 90s that would get warm when turned on. The radio hadn't been on either. Figured maybe it was the beat of a song or something. After that, we heard the footsteps a bunch of times, usually very early in the morning. Some of the footsteps were so heavy they'd shake the ceiling fan of the dining room directly under her bedroom, and they'd woken her up a few times as well. Whenever I'd shower at my dad's, I always felt like someone was standing behind me. Eventually, I got so stressed and paranoid that I refused to shower at the house or even go into the upstairs bathroom. My dad asked me one day,
Do you ever feel like someone's in the shower with you when you're here?
after months of me feeling that way and never mentioning it to anyone.
When I got fevers as a child, I would always, in my fugue and pain-infused state, hear a man counting in a very deep voice. He would start counting from 1. As the numbers grew larger, the voice would get louder and more intense. It started to happen less frequently as I grew older, and now I no longer experience it. I had brushed it aside as a recurring nightmare until only recently when I learned that my sister had experienced the exact same thing when she was younger. While it may not be the scariest experience, trying to comprehend this still sends shivers down my spine.
I work in a cemetery. One evening, I stayed late to catch up on some work. I was taking pictures of granite samples with my phone, having already locked up. I was alone. While I held my phone, I heard the basement doorway swing open, then slam shut, followed by the sound of footsteps descending the stairs. I froze, convinced that someone had entered. I called out to see if it was a maintenance worker, but there was no reply. Fear settled in. If it wasn't them, someone might have broken in. I stayed still, listening intently, then called out again. Silence. Finally, summoning courage, I decided to look. No one was there. I cautiously peered into the basement, finding it empty. All the doors were still locked.
My grandparents' house is considered by many to be extremely haunted. It's even included in a tour of haunted houses in the LA area, and according to legend, it was part of the inspiration for American Horror Story. There are tons of stories, but the one I experienced myself was when I was living there as a child. I was about 6 years old, and my older sister was 12, so we shared a room. My mom had decorated our bedside table with an antique telephone that didn't work and wasn't plugged in. One night, my sister and I were asleep, and for some reason, we both woke up at the same time and turned to face each other. I remember feeling an extreme sense of dread. Then, the phone rang between us. We locked eyes and both hid under our blankets until it stopped ringing. We both thought it was a dream because we didn't say anything about it for years. Then one day, she brought it up, and we realized we had both had the exact same experience.
My family's old house backed onto a pretty substantial forested ravine. I slept on the ground level floor, and my room was at the back of the house. On 4 separate occasions, spanning 5 years, I saw a middle-aged man dressed in a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and a red hat walk through my room with a dog leash in his hand. He would briefly stop at the same spot every time, look around, and then continue walking towards the ravine. I should note that this was fairly new construction in a suburb of a small city, and all that had been there previously was forest. I believe he may have lost his dog in the ravine at some point, and he was there trying to find it.
I went with my best friend during high school for summer vacation to his grandparents' house in the countryside in Japan. I stayed in his mom's old room, which had a small wall closet. Just above this closet was an even smaller closet door, about 1.5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. It was a weird design, but their house was old. For the first couple of weeks, I was pretty jet-lagged, and Japan's hot and humid climate made it hard to sleep at night. Even when my light was off, I always felt uneasy about that small closet space. There was something about it that just felt darker than the rest of the room. Towards the end of the second week, I started to adjust to the time difference. One morning, I woke up and noticed that the small door was open. It was unsettling, but I closed it and just thought maybe it hadn't been shut all the way and came loose. A couple of nights later, I woke up feeling uneasy. It was dark, and I could kind of see, and I noticed that the small door was open again. It was much darker than the rest of the room, like black, pitch dark. This was the first and only time I experienced paralysis. I was too scared to move, say anything, or do anything. I just felt this darkness coming from there. I don't remember sleeping that night, but I must because I remember waking up the next morning. I told my friend about it, and he said his mom told him about something like that happening too. When we got back home and I talked to his parents, his mom kind of joked with me.
So I heard you met the ghost.
My dad was in the hospital with a serious brain tumor. The hospital was about 40 miles from me, and he was in no shape to even stay awake. One night, I was chatting with a friend on MSN back in those days. Yup, and he asked how my dad was. I turned to my left and saw him sitting in his chair, just looking at me. I replied, "I think he's okay. He's in the room with me," to which my friend said, "Isn't he in the hospital?" I looked again, and there was nothing. I never mentioned it to anyone. I just told my friend I must have been seeing things. Dad survived and is still here today. Cut to about 21 years later, and I met up with my dad. We were just having a chat, and he says,
Something's been on my mind for years, son, and I can't shake it off. When I was in the hospital, I remember being at home, sitting in my chair. You were on the computer, and you looked at me. Then I woke up in the hospital, but it felt too real to be a dream.
That's when I told him about my experience.
When I was 6, I slept on a bunk bed in a room alone. The bottom bunk was empty. It was meant for my younger brother, but he was too scared to sleep in a bed alone. So I was alone in that room that night. I remember a chilling feeling that night, and then it suddenly got really warm, probably because I was undergoing a night terror of some sort. Then I started breathing heavily and opened my eyes to see the room was empty. My little night light in the corner of the room comforted me back to sleep. However, as I closed my eyes, I felt a heavy hand petting my shoulder. My eyes ripped open, and there was no one in the room. As soon as I lay back down, the petting continued, and I covered my head, just pretending to myself that it was my mom. It took me 12 years to stop sleeping with my head under the covers because of that memory. My mom, of course, knew a woman had passed away in that apartment before we moved in, so she always believed it was that woman trying to comfort me.
My earliest odd experience from my childhood home, I must have been between 3 and 6, and my dad would often pet me to sleep. I remember his big, warm hand on my upper back. So, my memory is waking in the middle of the night, being petted on my back. I'm sleeping on my tummy, and I slept with the light on back then. It is nice and warm at first, but it's pressing a bit too hard. I remember being sleepy and not wanting to be petted, so I try to shake it off. This causes the hand to intensely grapple and poke at my back really fast. I don't know why he would get so angry and sit up in my bed, and there's no one there. I get up and go sleep between my parents. A lot of odd things happened in that house, both to my parents and my siblings. I later got my parents' bedroom, and they took down a wall and made a larger bedroom for themselves, which included my old room. I remember one night being home alone in my teens, and stuff kept happening around the house so I couldn't sleep. So, I got up in the middle of the darkness and screamed into that dark hole of their bedroom to cut the crap and let me sleep in peace, and in general, leave me alone. This was around the time the happenings were at their highest, and that kind of settled it. I felt at ease there from then on.
My parents had flown to Houston when I was 11 years old to see a specialist for my dad's lymphoma. It had just returned from remission, but there was no reason to think he was in any imminent danger. I was riding my bike home the day they were to fly back and stop my bike in this ditch. We used to ride down/up on our way back. When I got to the top, I felt a wave of emotion come over me, and without even knowing what I was saying, I told my friend I was riding with that my dad had just died. My friend was like, "What?" I just knew. I rode the rest of the way home to find my grandparents, my dad's parents, bawling on our back porch. I stood there, watching them in the doorway for a few minutes, unable to walk out to talk to them. He had died an hour before I got home from school. There were no phone calls to the school, nor did I interact with anyone that knew prior to riding in the ditch. I just knew when that wave came over me. Again, there was no reason to think he was even remotely close to passing. He had caught pneumonia while in Houston and died from that.
Not me, but a security guard I employed when I ran a dispensary. She showed me the video. In fact, she sent it to me, and I still have it on my phone. It's a camera mounted in her young daughter's room. She's playing on her bed, which suddenly slides away from the wall about a foot. The daughter then jumps off the bed and runs out of the room to tell her mom. Later, the daughter randomly got up, walked towards and out the front door, while the mom was calling after her. The daughter snapped out of it once mom made physical contact. The daughter had no memory of how she got outside. So, the security guard calls a priest, who literally goes by and tries to do like an exorcism on the apartment, or whatever. About a week later, an electrical outlet behind a couch that she never used caught fire, and the whole apartment building burnt down.
I thought about my experience in Turkmenistan for work. I was in the capital of Ashgabat, waiting for my apartment lease to be approved by the local council, so I had to stay at their hotel. For context, Turkmenistan is also one of the toughest countries to get into. This was post-pandemic, so even their biggest hotel, which used to house dignitaries, was empty and dusty. I fell asleep after video calling my boyfriend. I was awoken with my duvet lifted from one edge, bringing half of it diagonally mid-air and almost wavy, all while hearing chants by a male voice in my left ear in a language I didn't understand. It was so fast and rough. I tried reciting all the prayers/Quranic verses I could. I was born Muslim, but I don't practice anymore, and it stopped for a short second, only to begin again with almost a mocking laughter in between the chants. At the same time, I could feel my left-hand fingers being pulled repeatedly. It ended as the sun rose. I immediately called my friend who was 3 hours ahead in time zone to just debrief and process what the heck just happened. I told this to some friends and local colleagues, and yes, they theorized some regional Jijins. Of course, I checked out of there that morning and moved into a staff boarding house. Most terrifying experience of my life.
My brother was on the phone once with his girlfriend when she started saying that she could hear some old lady asking my brother for a glass of water. There was nobody around him, so he ignored it, but she kept on insisting. He hung up the phone and went to check on our grandma, who was in her bedroom, and found her dead. Fast forward a couple of years, around 11 p.m., I was on the phone with a girl when I saw a guy on a bicycle go past. Phone was by the windowsill, same spot as my brother. That's when I noticed she stopped talking and asked her if she was still there. She apologized, thinking I got into trouble. I said no and asked why she said that. She replied, "Someone was telling me to stop talking on the phone. It's late. Go to bed." I was on my own. Everybody in the house was already asleep. I asked her if it was an old lady, and she said yes. I told her it's my grandma, and that the same thing happened to my brother. She started talking about ghosts and stuff, so I told her I'm hanging up and bolted into my room.
My family and I used to stay in a very affordable beach cottage in the Outer Banks, NC, for a few weeks each summer. It was a converted life-saving station, complete with a lookout tower. I was just a kid, 13 or 14, when we first started staying there. I used to walk around and talk to the local kids. They were shocked that I was staying there. I didn't believe them because kids will be kids, and I figured they were just trying to scare me. I was wrong. The first few nights were quiet, but every night after that, something would happen. My aunt claimed that her bed raised off the floor and shook violently, knocking her to the floor. She slept in the car for the remainder of our vacation. I, being a bratty kid, just figured she was drunk. I stayed upstairs in the room where they used to keep rescued and dying sailors. One morning, I woke up to such loud banging in my room, I was terrified. Nobody was there. One of the beds had overturned while I was sleeping. The next night, I woke up to more banging and loud laughter from the tower. I figured it was my sister on the phone, but nobody was there. As the days went on, I felt like somebody was watching me any time I showered or used the upstairs bathroom. The banging in the tower was nightly at this point, and I was absolutely terrified. One morning I had slept in, being a teenager and all, and woke up to my relatives trying to get into the house after a morning at the beach. Every single door in the entire house was deadlocked from the inside. Very odd. We spent a few more summers there, each time with the same experience. Eventually, the house washed away during a hurricane, leaving only the tower behind on the beach. It's a shame, because I'd love to stay there as an adult and see